Hello, my name is Melissa Eggins and I work on the Drug and Alcohol Court Implementation Team within the Courts Innovation Program of the Department of Justice and Attorney General. I'm speaking today with Magistrate Annette Hennesy. Magistrate Hennesy is the magistrate appointed to the Queensland Government's new Drug and Alcohol Court, which is located in the Brisbane Magistrates Court. The Queensland Drug and Alcohol Court responds to the 2016 Drug and Specialist Courts Review. Legislation enabling the court was passed in Queensland's Parliament in October 2017. The program underpinning the court is unique and highly collaborative, housing multi-agency staff including Queensland Health clinicians, corrective services officers and Queensland Police prosecutors. Legal advice is provided by Legal Aid Queensland. This team works alongside Queensland court staff, including a cultural liaison officer and case managers, to monitor and support offenders through a 2-year treatment sentence. Magistrate Hennesy, welcome to the podcast. It is really exciting that you've been appointed to the drug court. When you first found out, what was your initial feeling?
I was excited because I really like working in diversionary courts, and the opportunities for that have become a little bit more limited in country areas because of resourcing, and especially to be able to come in at the start and be part of the setup and have the initial implementation idea about the direction. So so that was really exciting.
I would imagine as a magistrate that would be a very powerful opportunity in front of you.
Yeah, it is good, and it's nice to not to have to be trying to stitch together changes within a framework that isn't really meant to fit what you're trying to do. So having it start from scratch and be a whole new framework and have its own direction and be able to sort of work towards that from the beginning is really great.
If we could touch on your background and your history, you do have a history of driving innovation. I've read with interest your history in northern Queensland. Can you tell me about some of the initiatives you've been involved in, but I guess more importantly, how they came about?
Well, the first one on the bench, I guess, although I had sort of been involved in doing some things while I was a solicitor in practice, like setting up community legal centres and those sort of things. So I sort of always had an interest in trying to see where people were falling through the gaps and trying to address that to reduce the chance of that happening. I got appointed to Rockhampton in 1999, and in early 2003 the then Chief Magistrate had a reconciliation ceremony where she gave an apology to the Aboriginal people, Di Fingleton. She started to set up a Murray Court in Brisbane, so I had acted as agent for ATSLs out in the country when I was a practice in Gundawindi. So I had always had that interest in Aboriginal issues, and so I fortunately met a really wonderful woman called Carol Willey, who became eventually the court coordinator for Murray Court in Rockhampton, but she was in at corrections, and between the two of us we set up a program and started in June 2003 with adults and then children in Murray Court. So that was probably the first one, but then we had an Indigenous alcohol diversion program called QUIDUP. That was a similar thing involving, wide consultation with the community, a lot of community organisations coming in and all working together towards getting parents who had children in the child protection system and criminal charges to have an alcohol diversion program, especially for Indigenous. I started to try and work out a specialised domestic violence list and looking between domestic violence, the criminal aspects of that, and child protection, to start trying to work out how we would try and address those issues in a more specific and directed way. That then led to the Breaking the Cycle pilot. We kept doing what we were doing at court, but then we had the pilot sort of sitting beside court, and we got some extra resources for duty lawyers and whatnot for domestic violence. But that was sort of working on domestic violence in a much more holistic way, which is pretty similar to what's happening now at Southport. Then when I went to Maroochydore, I got involved with Q-Merit, which was the sort of halfway drug court really, but a 26-week program for persons with a drug problem that has contributed to their offending. So it sort of has meant that between all of those different areas of law, I've managed to work out how best to approach those diversionary courts, and all of that was, well, back in 2003 was very new to the court and not within our normal skill set.
I've read that the character Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird...
I'm going to forever regret that.
...is a primary motivator for you. But listening to you there, and I'll touch on that point where you said picking up people falling through the cracks, it sounds like that was you and why you became a lawyer in the first place.
Yeah, I think the thing about To Kill a Mockingbird was it just grabbed me about how powerful that courtroom scene was and how much influence you could have on making decisions that affect people's lives in a courtroom. And so that was probably the initial thing as a 13 or 14-year-old or whatever I was that grabbed me. I got raised with a pretty strong social justice viewpoint and educated by Franciscans in high school, so they're very community oriented and helping people, I guess, looking for where those gaps in services are and trying to make people's lives a little bit easier. So I guess that was probably partly bred into me. When I read that question, I thought, wow, I hadn't even thought about the Indigenous component of To Kill a Mockingbird, but I guess it was people of disadvantage was the big thing in that circumstance. It wasn't necessarily about race, but just anyone who's at disadvantage, that they don't get a fair go if they're left to their own devices.
But I did have the opportunity to sit in on your court. We came to observe the other day. But I guess what I saw was that you were compassionate but firm. Is that how you would describe yourself in your role as a magistrate?
Yeah, I think so. Being firm is pretty essential, and I was appointed at 36, so I was quite a young woman, and going to the country to a fairly conservative place as a 36-year-old magistrate, I had to be firm from the start to be taken seriously, really. And but then I realised that it actually works if you combine it with respect and allowing people some dignity. There were two huge learning things for me in Murray Court. And one was that our motto always was, like, between the elders and the court and the justice group, was that we would be critical of the offending behaviour but not of the person, to try and examine why have you done this thing which has been bad and affected people negatively. I think if you combine respect and dignity and a bit of empathy with firmness, then people respond to that. And certainly I was in Rockhampton for over 13 years, so a lot of the defendants had appeared before me many times, some of them, and some from when they were children, and then they were offending as adults, and unfortunately they kept offending, so that's why they knew me so well. But some of the feedback that I got was that they thought I was firm but fair, and to me fairness is probably the biggest aspect of being a judge that needs to be honoured, because if there's no fairness, then I don't know where we are, really. I don't know why we're doing this.
It sounds almost like the best practice model for parenting. It's the sort of thing they say,
Yeah, I guess so.
Don't target
be consistent.
It's not the child, it's the behaviour.
Exactly,
it's
yeah.
a grown-up version of that.
And that's something that gets missed a lot in criminal court, is that it tends to sort of get all rolled into one. But Murray Court really showed me very starkly that that's an essential thing, to try and have the person's idea of themselves intact, but knowing that way they can then accept that they need some help to do something about what's going wrong in their life. But if you just knock them down and tell them they're terrible people and there's no hope for them, well then they won't have any hope.
Yes. So the research is clear worldwide that drug courts do work, best practice drug courts that work. So how do you see this new court helping Queensland? Helping
people overcome whatever problem it is that they happen to have, and it's usually more than one, that contributes to their offending or leads them to offending, and especially addictions, I think, fall into this category most markedly. But helping them work on that really has a ripple effect away from the person. So obviously you're helping them deal with what their issues are, that in that way they take accountability for their actions and they're working on themselves to try and improve and reduce offending or stop offending in the future. There's ups and downs in that. It's pretty difficult to do. But it also improves, and I saw this a lot through Murray Court, it improves the quality of life of their family, their friends, the community around them as well. So there's lots of impacts on a lot more people than you think. Apart from the immediate impacts for that person about not offending and improving their health and being more socially responsible, it actually does contribute to improving community safety and social cohesion in the community. It has a lot of impacts that really aren't measurable, which has made it difficult for diversionary courts over the years because evaluations are usually focused on recidivism and cost and, is it effective if the person keeps committing offences, even if they might be reduced or more infrequent. So, but it's hard to measure all of that other stuff, which is why it sort of doesn't get focused on, but that's really the most powerful part. Like, there was one man in Murray Court who was always getting into trouble, not for very serious things, but he came back and saw me one day with the elders and was so proud, wanted to come and tell me that because he had got off the grog and wasn't getting into trouble and he was spending more time with his kids, and his eldest daughter had been made the school captain of her primary school, and he contributed all of that to the improvement in his behaviour and drinking and how he was acting with his family. And he was so proud of her. He said, she's the first school captain ever in our family. So, that sort of stuff you can't measure, but it's priceless to that family and probably to the school and to that little girl's future. Yeah, he put that all down to the improvements that he made while he was working with Murray Court on what his issues were.
When I look at the whole drug court model, I see one of the key benefits is having everyone there, the multi-agency co-located into one team. What do you see the benefits of that being?
That's been one of the issues with diversionary courts up until now, has been that even though we're working in multidisciplinary teams and people might come to court for meetings and be there on the court day or whatever, that then everybody disperses, and if a defendant comes in needing help away from those times, then they have to get sent on to somewhere else, and they fall through a crack then because they usually don't make it, even if it's in the next door building. Having all of the team there makes it a lot easier to provide a consistent service to people, even when they're not scheduled. But it also really helps to improve their attendance rate. So it reduces the amount of times they have appointments. It means that all the appointments are in the one place, so they'll come to the fourth floor for court, for treatment, for testing, and for legal advice about those issues. So it'll be a place where they can do everything and be a central focus point for them. But it will reduce the amount of times they have appointments, so they're not going to one suburb for Queensland Health to get tested and then to another suburb to have some treatment on a different day or maybe the same day. They've got transport issues, timing problems. Keeping appointments can be problematic for people with addictions because they're maybe not sleeping well at night and waking up late and just basically a little bit chaotic. So all of that helps from a practical point of view to improve attendance, and once you've got them there, then you can be working. But the other thing is it also provides more cohesion in the team, I think, because the exchange of information is pretty immediate about updating what's happening with a certain person or with a practice or a procedure or new research or whatever. All of that can be exchanged fairly quickly. It obviously builds some camaraderie amongst the various team members that aren't really used to working with each other. But it's really actually quite difficult to work with organisations from different government departments that have never been engaged with the legal process before, because we're pretty much a fixed model as far as what can and can't happen is governed by the legislation. Especially social science, social workers and people who provide treatment find it very difficult to engage with the legal system, and the legal system does need to soften around the edges to be able to be interactive with those other service providers as well. So it helps with all of that. When you're working in a team like this, especially when you're all coming from a different place with different qualifications, coming from a different professional culture and all working together, is that the wisdom doesn't reside with any one person. So when you're having a meeting around the table, you really have to put yourself in that mind space that you're completely open to what everybody's opinion is about a certain thing. And that's something that traditionally has been very difficult for judicial officers, because that's not really the way we work or the way we're trained. And in the end result, we still do need to be that silo that makes the legal decision on the basis of the law, but we have to be open enough to receive all of the supporting information to inform that decision. That was a big cultural change when we started doing programs like Murray Court, but that's now 15 years ago.
Final question. Community misconception is that drug courts are soft.
Oh yeah, no.
And that they don't respect victims. What's your message to people that think that?
Well, any diversionary court, but especially drug court, because it's going to be a minimum 2 years of treatment, can't ever be described as a soft option. Because if with people with entrenched problems and behaviours that follow from that, whether it's from addiction or from other issues like mental health issues or other social issues that have led to the addictions in the first place, and even the criminal behaviour can be an issue that's hard to move away from if your whole social set are criminals, or family environment, it has that leaning. It can be the hardest thing in the world for people to actually confront all of those things and deal with them. And that's part of the reason why the minimum treatment period's 2 years, because that's been found to be most effective to deal with usually multiple problems that are all contributing to the addiction. It just really depends how motivated they are. Some people want to do it, but they're not capable of doing it at that stage, and they might come back to it later. Some people just aren't even prepared to try because it's all too hard. So a lot of people with various diversionary courts just say, look, it's easier just to go to jail. But for those that do, and do the hard yards and get through the treatment, then it can make some massive changes to their life, and as I said, to other people around them as well. So it's certainly not a soft option. The thing with the way the drug court orders are being set up is that there's always that sentence hanging over their head, that they can be sanctioned with various punishments up to and including short terms of imprisonment. So it's not as if it's something that if you're not complying, that it's, oh, okay, well, that didn't work, off you go and try something else. The end of the road's jail. If they're having problems that really need some sort of correction, then there's the possibility of jail as well. So there's some teeth built into it as well. As far as respecting victims go, there's been some protections put in around particular types of offences. So a drug and alcohol court won't take sexual offences and will only take domestic violence related offences after an analysis of whether or not that's going to potentially put the aggrieved in any danger or have any safety issues. So those issues will all be looked at before we decide whether or not that person's able to come onto the program. And if it looks like there's going to be any sort of adverse outcome for the aggrieved or the victim, then it's likely that we won't take them. The other aspect is victim impact statements. This is a normal court to the extent that victim impact statements can be presented. So the view of the victim about the impact of the offending on them is still taken into account in sentencing. Victims will be able to write in at different stages, if they're known to the defendant, different stages of the program to say how there's positive or negative impacts on them from the person while they're undergoing treatment, and that can get taken into account along the way as well. But I think as a whole, as far as if the community's the victim, so it's offending against the state or the community, then it does, in my view, it does ultimately show respect to them, because it's showing that the court is taking the issue, and other government agencies are taking the issue about that offending that seriously, that we're throwing a lot of effort at trying to move that person away from offending to protect the community. So I don't think it's disrespectful to victims. It doesn't downplay the impact on any victims, whether they're individual people, businesses or the community. And the other thing is, if a person goes through treatment and they get a job, because housing and employment and life skills and all sorts of things are included in the treatment, then that will probably put them in a position where they're able to pay restitution if it's property offences that they would never be able to pay if they went to jail. And so in that way, that can potentially help to restore the financial loss that the victims might have suffered as well.
Thank you, Magistrate Hennesy, for sharing your insights with us today. We look forward to hearing about the successes of the court in the future.